weeks ago. So you can look up online for some of the videos. We'll see if we can show them here as well. But we're going to talk a little bit about the Mezuzot in Gaza. And you see on the sources, the headline, Israeli troops hold mezuzah hanging ceremony in Gaza City from November 20th. There were a couple of different clips that are being reported on in different places. I saw the first one within a tweet. But the fact that Israeli soldiers are fighting and spending time in Gaza has, I guess, reopened Gaza for religious activities. There was a sign, usually, in Israel, they always advertise the candle lighting times and the Shabbat ending times. Tel Aviv area, Jerusalem area, Beit Shemesh area, Tzfat, north, south. One sign that came out after the ground operations had started was Gaza. Right, Gaza. What time does Shabbos start in Gaza? There's soldiers who are keeping Shabbos now. Some places talk about the Gaza envelope area. So there's certainly, if there's Jewish soldiers there, there's Judaism being practiced there. And this emerged. There was a mezuzah hanging ceremony. Look at source number 1. IDF troops hold mezuzah hanging ceremony in Gaza City. IDF Israel National News reported on Monday, Givati Infantry Brigade Rabbi Daniel Kind led the ceremony, which was attended by soldiers and commanders in the Strip as part of a mission to defeat Hamas after the October 7th massacre. Due to uncertainty concerning the Gaza City ceremony under Jewish law, the rabbi recited a verse from Psalms instead of a regular blessing. When putting up the mezuzah, he didn't say the bracha that we say when affixing the mezuzah, likboa mezuzah, and we'll talk more about that in the terms of the sources. But he said, "Blessed are you, O Lord, train me in your laws." Anyone know what that would be in Hebrew? What pseudo bracha that is?
Lamdeni chukecha.
Yes, Baruch Atah Ad Hashem, and you say God's name. Lamdeni chukecha. It's invoking a verse from Tehillim, and it's a way to avoid saying a blessing in vain. If you start saying a bracha, you don't finish the bracha. If you don't need it, you say Lamdeni chukecha. You invoke a blessing, even if you're not sure to make the blessing. Rabbi Yoel Rachel, who was expelled from Gush Katif during the 2005 disengagement from the Gaza Strip, posted video to Facebook on November 16th of another mezuzah blessing ceremony after IDF troops took over Al-Azhar University in Gaza City, which the rabbi renamed in Hebrew El-Azhar instead of Al-Azhar. So there are a number of these situations taking place. There are soldiers encamped there. They're dwelling there. So certainly the idea of the mezuzah, to understand better the issue of the mezuzah, is something to explore and study, remind us of some of the laws of mezuzah, as well as there's one of the videos which I was looking for yesterday. I'd seen a couple of weeks ago, where after the bracha on affixing the mezuzah is recited, you hear, you see in the video a religious soldier, and I guess a little bit stereotypically looked like, one of the Hesder guys who was interrupting, and also says, Matziv Gevul Almana, saying that there's another bracha to be recited. And we're going to see there is another bracha. There's a bracha about restoring and rebuilding Jewish homes, that there's a bracha to be recited. If you haven't heard of it, neither have most people, and it's unclear whether it's actually recited fully with God's name. So we'll also discuss that, because that's another blessing that has been recited within this context, and we'll see whether it applies more broadly as well. So those are the that lays out the issues. That's the headline we're ripping from. Questions, comments on the article before we tackle both a little bit of a review of the laws of mezuzah and this unique bracha of Matziv Gevul Almana. Okay, so we all know about a mezuzah, right? Source number 2, it's a positive commandment to write the Shema and the V'hayim Shemoah and to fix them on the side of one's door. And one needs to be very careful in this, and all who are careful in this, their days will be lengthened, and the days of their children. And if one is not careful in this, his days will be shortened. Right? I've mentioned before the book by A.J. Jacobs, The Year of Living Biblically, where he tries to, or he recounts some of his experiences in a year following the rules of the Bible. And he writes that when it came to the mezuzah, he wrote these words on his doorpost, because it doesn't say to have a scroll, it says to write on the doorpost. So that's what he did. But we know that the way it gets understood from the oral tradition and the rabbis is what has to happen is the putting in of the scrolls with the Shema V'Hayim Shemoah. And what the idea that there's a promise of a long life, because we know at the end of the second paragraph of Shema, L'man yirbu yimechem yimei v'nechem, your days and your children's days will be lengthened. So that is how the Shulchan Aruch recounts the obligation and also records the idea of a reward that comes from this. The Gemara in Menachot 33b talks about another aspect of the mezuzah. Rava says it's a mitzvah to place the mezuzah in the handbreadth adjacent to the public domain. Rav Chanina from Surah says this is in order that the mezuzah protect the entire house by placing it as far as outside as one can. You want it to be outside the compound so that the mezuzah protects the entire house. And this leads to the Aruch HaShulchan including in the laws of mezuzah that the house is guarded by the mezuzah. And here's where we get the idea that if something goes wrong, maybe check the mezuzahs because your spiritual security system is down. But the idea of mezuzah is to note the fact that it's a Jewish home, it's a mitzvah. There's a certain element of it being a very spiritually rewarding mitzvah, both in terms of long life and in terms of protection. This leads to, if you've ever looked at the scroll of the mezuzah, right? It has the familiar passages of the Shema in the V'Hayim Shemoah. Sometimes on the outside, there are a number of letters that have been written there, also typed in that Torah type script. And those are segula, those are protective letters. There's not a strong halachic feature to them, but this is the idea that the mezuzah, on a certain level, acts as a kamiyah, as an amulet. The Rambam wrote about his displeasure with this aspect of the mezuzah, but we see it's built into the tradition. The Torah talks about mezuzah in close proximity with the reward of long life. The Gemara talks about mezuzah with its positioning as being one of protection. It's kind of difficult to escape that aspect of mezuzah, and that's why people appreciate the role of mezuzah as identifying a Jewish home and protecting a Jewish home. Now, obviously it's not just on the outside, it's every single door. And there are legal obligations, what kind of doors, door posts. Interestingly enough, that a synagogue does not need a mezuzah. It's only a dwelling place, and so shuls and study halls don't officially need them. However, it's kind of become expected. Jewish places have mezuzahs. And so that's why shuls put them up. Whenever someone notices that there's a door in a shul missing one, we just put one up because people expect it. And on some level, they come to, maybe they'll model their behavior after the shul being careful on mezuzah. So there's nothing wrong with the shul having mezuzahs. You just wouldn't make a bracha before fixing it. But it's the idea of you have a Jewish home has a mezuzah. They talk about, for example, businesses, right? Usually a mezuzah goes on a dwelling. Let's see, what about an office? So the practice has emerged for putting mezuzahs on offices, even though they're not technically dwellings, right? There's the whole joke about does a sports car get a mezuzah? We'll save that for another time. The idea that a mezuzah is a Jewish marker, a Jewish identifier, it's also especially relevant these days, right before we're starting Hanukkah on Thursday night. And the idea of the positioning of the menorah, the Gemara says very specifically of putting the menorah in a place by the door on the other side of the mezuzah, so that you have the mezuzah on one side and the menorah on the other side, or the Hanukkah lights on the other, and that's amplifying the Jewish nature, character of the home, performance of mitzvos and the like. Generally speaking, nowadays we put the mezuzah, the menorah, the Hanukkah lights in the window, which is its own subject of another class. But the mezuzah stands out as very much an identifying Jewish symbol. The mezuzah necklace, as an example, is right up there with the Magen David and the Chai. It's an identifying characteristic. So it's not surprising if we have Israeli soldiers as they begin to stake out where they're going to be staying the buildings that are going to be theirs for sleeping or for using for military purposes to put the mezuzah on. It's an identifier. There's a segula for protection, which is something soldiers are certainly concerned with and high on their minds. But so army bases have mezuzahs, whether it be the IDF rabbinate or organizations that want to make sure that all army bases have mezuzot where the soldiers are sleeping. But there's also a unique Israel character or Israel feature when it comes to the mezuzah, because generally speaking, a person, if they own a home, they're responsible for the mezuzah. If they rent the home, they're not always responsible for the mezuzah immediately, but only after 30 days. If you own something and it's your home and you're living there, it's one thing. But if you're renting, it's not your home. And this idea of you are taking possession enough to have a dwelling, have to have the mezuzah is only 30 days later. But the law is different in Israel. Source number 5. One who rents a house or a room outside the land, or one who lodges at an inn in the land of Israel, is exempt from mezuzah for 30 days. One who rents a house or a room in Eretz Yisrael requires mezuzah immediately due to the mitzvah of dwelling in Eretz Yisrael. And this is the law for someone who borrows a house. The law is like the renter. So we see that in Israel, the responsibility, the obligation for mezuzah begins immediately. This idea of dwelling in a home, the yishuv, the settling down in a home, is magnified because of the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, the mitzvah to dwell in Israel. And since you have a mitzvah to be dwelling in the place that you're dwelling, the mitzvah of mezuzah begins right away as well. And this was something that came to mind when watching the soldiers, because they just got there. They're not there for 30 days. They're not sure they're going to be there for 30 days. But when there's a mitzvah of settling the land, well, the mitzvah of mezuzah starts off immediately as well, and therefore there's no delay, there's no 30-day wait period. You put up the mezuzah. The other thought that crossed my mind is, whose house was it? Was this a Hamas government building? Was it being seized? Was it being reconquered? The manner of acquisition also doesn't matter, because whether you're renting or even borrowing, and borrowing meaning extends it to beyond just there being a contract of whether you own the house or not, would seem to extend, if you're in the house, you're dwelling there in Israel, you need a mezuzah immediately. And so that the desire for the soldiers to have that mezuzah and to put it up immediately would make sense. Now, what about the bracha? And so if you look at some of the situations in some of the videos, the article mentioned not making the bracha because they weren't 100% sure that the bracha was necessary. Again, the various factors could be whether they're going to stay there, whether they're going to actually sleep there, whether they're going to be there for a while or not. But generally speaking, the bracha of putting up a mezuzah as a sher kiddushanu mitzvosav v'tzivanu likboa mezuzah, to put up the mezuzah. Now, it was interesting that if some of the videos, the soldiers were saying al kviat mezuzah, which is not the one that is recorded, and also some of them were saying shehechianu. Now, the shehechianu could have been a moment of excitement. We know that when you feel happy, you should say shehechianu. Now, we're used to saying shehechianu under certain criteria, holidays that come once a year, or significant purchases, or good news. But technically, anytime one feels joy, and that joy rises to a level of shehechianu, maybe finishing a battle and being able to settle down for a period of time, a shehechianu emotion might be felt. You could talk also whether there's a gomel blessing to be recited, but certainly a shehechianu makes sense. With regard to anything other than likboa mezuzah, why would that have been? The issue? So if we look in the Vilna Gaon, the Vilna Gaon talks about with regards to the bracha. Source number 6 talks about making the bracha likboa mezuzah. Yerushalmi Parak Basra the brachas v'sham amar al mitzvas mezuzah. Asher kiddushanu mitzvosav v'tzivanu al mitzvas mezuzah. That you're saying the bracha that way. So it could be that there were different languages and different nuschaot, different texts of the bracha, and that led to some of other language or deviating from likboa mezuzah. And the Shach talks also about this blessing, and raises the issue: how come there's no, generally speaking, a shechianu made when affixing a mezuzah? Like, why isn't there that level of excitement when you're putting on the mezuzah to say shechianu in and of itself? I mentioned some of the soldiers were saying it, and again, some of the brachos being recited by the soldiers in these situations may not have been thought through or asking the shaila, right? Like in the article, he didn't want to say the bracha. So the Shach mentions this idea that Hada'en Mavar Shehechianu, source number 7 in the second line, Mishum De'eno Ba Mizman Lizman. This is not something that we say, a mitzvah that happens from time to time. This is a mitzvah that happens once. Vishani Talis Ubeget Shalosh Shemavar Chalav Shechianu. It's different also than a ritual object, like a talis, where you say a Shechianu. Mishum simcha, because there's joy. Mezuzah eino mevarech al shazikeyu Hashem yisbarach b'vayis el al mitzvahs kvias hamezuzah, because when the shechianu on the mezuzah is on putting up a mezuzah. The shechianu, the joy is on the house, but the mitzvah is you don't have the mezuzah. You're saying the blessing on the mitzvah, not on the ability to have the house. So when you buy the house, you say the shechianu. That's the joy in that level, not on the placement of the ritual object on the wall. That is a mitzvah. Not all mitzvahs are shechianu moments, even if it is very exciting to be moving into the first house. The shechianu is on the house and not on the mezuzah. So you have here a number of issues relating to the mezuzah, and with regards to the mezuzahs being affixed in the places in Gaza, certainly a desire to have that protection, certainly a desire to fulfill that mitzvah, long life, certainly the fact that there's a Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, dwelling in Israel, addendum to the idea of dwelling in the house, for the idea for having a mezuzah to go up would be amplified. The bracha to be recited would be likboa. Some felt that the bracha should not be recited because of the complexity of how long they're going to be there. But it certainly as a symbol of Jewish dwelling and a desire for some type of protection is something that we can appreciate and understand the excitement. And if you see some of those videos, you will notice it there. Questions, comments on the mezuzah components?
So when did the Shulchan Aruch mentions about the mezuzah being placed as far away from the house as possible, provides for protection. When did the practice of putting a mezuzah up on every doorpost within the house, when did that develop? Is that part of the mitzvah d'oraisa? Is that d'rabbanan?
So the short answer, it's part of the mitzvah d'oraisa. I think part of it has to do with the nature of houses, in terms of there was likely a very significant difference between the houses we live in today and the houses they had back then. They didn't necessarily have 4 distinct bedrooms and a sitting room and a dining room and the like. You had a space, and also keep in mind especially this idea of unique doorways and the like. So I would imagine you don't have as much conversation about multiple mezuzot because of construction, rather than it being because there was no obligation. And I think that's really where it comes from. The idea, and the idea of protecting, also that when the Gemara Menachos talks about putting on the outside for protection, just wants to make sure that the whole house is protected. I think it's less a statement about that's where the one mezuzah is, rather than the doorway should encompass as much space as possible for protection. And then you end up with multiple doorways, and especially in contemporary construction. You have doorways without doors. You have doors without doorways. You have a doorway you have a double doorway, a doorway into small little piece of floor that goes into the bigger room, and then at some level, we have you have moving walls. We've certainly raised the bar in terms of the complexity of the mezuzah questions. So much so I still remember one house seeing that it essentially had all the different rooms, but it had no doorways. And so, so contemporary construction and the more modern look has definitely made things tricky. Also, keep in mind, a lot of it is sometimes feng shui, because the rule is that the mezuzah goes on the right hand as you go in. Well, how the doorway from the kitchen to the dining room, is it from the kitchen to the dining room, or the dining room to the kitchen? In some places, it's both. Generally, in addition to there being specific times where a mezuzah is obligated, not obligated, we will sometimes allow for an extra mezuzah or two to maintain the overall, to be certain that you're putting them in the right places, and sometimes because it's almost expected. I sometimes talk about, imagine a scenario where you have a doorway that goes into a very small little piece of floor that goes into the real door of the bedroom. Maybe in that small little area, there's a little closet off to the side. So you're talking about a small piece of a doorway going into a very small area of floor or space that's not really a room, that then has another doorway going into the bedroom. So in that scenario, really the inner door is the door into the bedroom. The outer doorway, whether it has a door or not, isn't really going into anything. At the same time, if someone would look at that doorway and see no mezuzah, they think, oh, you don't have a mezuzah into your bedroom. So it's kind of appearances, obligation. There's nothing wrong with more mezuzahs. Costs a little bit of money, but I don't think Chazal were dealing with those types of scenarios construction wise. So let's move from the mezuzah to the matziv gevul almana scenario, right? And so I said that there was the Gemara in Brachos. We're looking at source number 8. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Haroa Bate Yisrael b'Yishuvan, if you see a house in Israel that is restored, right, inhabited, Mivare Omer Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Matziv Gevul Almana, recognizing God as a source of all blessing, who establishes the border of the widow. Right? If you see it destroyed, Baruch Dayan Ho'emes, the blessing of on bad news. So you have here this bracha Matziv Gevul Almana. Now Rashi mentions this idea that what does it mean to be rebuilt? Built as it was rebuilt during the Second Temple era. Right? The bracha is talking about the restoring the border of the widow. Who's described? What's described as being widowed? Right? It talks about the city of Jerusalem was widowed in the destruction of the first temple. So in the Second Temple era, you see things restored in the Second Temple era that have been restored and are standing, that you can say this bracha. So the question that the commentators need to try to figure out is, where exactly is this bracha recited and upon what building? Right? I mentioned that in Gaza there was that, in addition to putting up the mezuzah, there was a desire to encouragement to say this blessing as well, because you had buildings, right? Israel used to control Gaza. Israel disengaged from Gaza. Now Jews are back in Gaza. If the house is there and it's standing, and it's now under Jewish authority, does that mean you say the bracha of Matziv Gevul Almana? Or is it specifically tied to the Second Temple? Or is it specifically tied to certain types of buildings? How is it understood? So the Shulchan Aruch says, source number 10, quotes this halacha. He says, Haroeh Batei Yisrael b'Yishuvan, you see built Jewish homes, Kigon b'Yishuv b'Yisheni. He mentions this Rashi qualification of like the Second Temple. You say the bracha Matziv Gevul Almana. And if you see it destroyed, you say the bracha of Dayan Emet. So the Shulchan Aruch, puts it out there, qualifies it with regards to the Second Temple construction. Just so there seems to be, would be that it's being rebuilt. So how do the commentaries understand the Shulchan Aruch? Again, Shulchan Aruch is very vague. It doesn't really, is this everything? Is it certain situations? So the Mishnah Berurah tries to unpack the Shulchan Aruch based on the other commentaries. So what are these Batei Yisrael? So Mishnah Berurah begins, source number 14, invoking the Rashi Bayit Sheni piece. Batei Ashirei Yisrael Shemiyushavim Betokef Uvigvura. Kigon Biyishuv Bayisheni. If the Jews are in charge in building homes, significant homes, right? You have the Ashirei Yisrael, the wealthy homes. You're rebuilding things of a substantive nature, and the Jews that aren't going to be destroyed by enemies. That's what we're talking about. The Efshar Dafka Be'eretz Yisrael Uvizman Bayisheni Kamar. Maybe it means only in Israel during the Second Temple. Aval Bizman Hazeh Afilu Be'eretz Yisrael though. Today, no, even in Israel. So the Mishnah begins by saying these are substantive construction under Jewish control would seem to be the situation. He then quotes the Beit Yosef that says no, only in Beit Sheni nowadays no. V'yeshem Mefarshim. He then goes to say that those who explain it Rashi. Dafilu imhem miyushavim ata kemo b'Beit Sheni gam ken mevarchim. No, it's not about just in that time. It's like the buildings are standing like in that time. And so you would be able to say the blessing today. The Harif, what is Rabbi Alfasi says, Batei Yisrael b'Yishuvon hanu batei knesiot shemitpalalim b'tochan chenago olam. So he says, no, it's synagogues. This is a blessing on synagogues. She'en mevarchim al sharei batim kima beit hakneset kesherot habiyafia v'tikuna. You see a beautiful shul. That's the only situation you make it in. It doesn't matter. A nice shul, Israel or in the diaspora that is built, you say this blessing. So maybe with all of this doubt, then you just never say the bracha in its entirety. You don't say Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Matzil Gvul Almana fully. You ignore or you omit. Never ignore God's name. But you would omit God's name and just recite it as Baruch Matziv Gvul Almana. So the Mishnah Berurah unpacks this rule, saying, look, maybe it was only in the time of the Second Temple, which means we never do it. Maybe it's all buildings that are independently standing under Jewish control, like in the Second Temple, and that's a very expansive way of saying it. You have the Rif who limits it to synagogues, expands it to synagogues in both Israel and diaspora, but only synagogues. And then the Mishnah Berurah concludes by recognizing the complexity and saying, don't say it without God's name, don't say the blessing. And, in many ways, a lot of these blessings of seeing things or that relate to an emotional experience have become less common to be recited over time. We talked before about feeling excitement and saying Shehechianu. There's the bracha of Hatova HaMeitiv, the God who does good and does good for others. And this has a certain situations of when it's to be recited, birth of children, grandchildren, and the like. But it's also officially the bracha on having a second bottle of wine that was better than the first. And many feel that we're not that type of wine connoisseurs to know what's better than the first. But there's technically a bracha when there's good news and there was exciting news, and having another bottle of wine is an enhancement of the gathering. So we should get in touch with our emotions and see these blessings of experience, of seeing, of the like. But we see the complexity, right? This bracha of Matziv Gvul Almana, I think, is in a similar category. Is it then? Is it now? Is it shul? Is it home? Is it what's the situation? So we see the reluctance to go forward and say, let's say the bracha. So Rabbi Eliezer Melamed, a contemporary author who is a major figure in the Dati Leumi community in Israel. So he writes about this bracha from a contemporary perspective, source number 12. Roeh Batei Yisrael shenecharu be'eretz Yisrael. If you see homes in Israel that have been destroyed, you say Dayan Ha'emes. B'derech klal birchu Dayan Ha'emes al batim shegoyim hecharivu. Usually it would be because the Jews were attacked by non-Jews and the non-Jews destroyed the homes. Ach l'davon libeinu b'shanim ha'achronos ne'elatznu levarach Dayan Ha'emes gam al batim sheYehudim hecharivu. Recent years we've had to say it on the homes of Israel that Jews have destroyed. Where? Al Yishuvei Chavel Yamit, Gush Katif, Utzon HaShomron. He talks about places where Israel disengaged, right? Or Israel gave back the Sinai to the Egyptians, and they had to destroy Yamit. They disengaged from Gaza. They destroyed those settlements and the 3 northern settlements in the north of Shomron. If anyone sees the ruins of those places, if they still exist, you'd have to say Dayan Hoemet, even on Jewish homes destroyed by Jews. On the other hand, though, he says, but if there's a bracha to be said on restored Jewish homes. This is something a bracha on Jews returning to their land. God has had mercy on us, restored us to our land. To dwell there in security. The difficult years of the exile, when there was difficulty for the Jewish settlement in the land, right, it was oppressed. This bracha was not recited. Means to establish, means to reestablish, to stand. When the Jews weren't in charge in the days of Jewish settlements in the throughout the generations, you didn't have that type of confidence and in security and strength. However, when the Jewish settlement expanded, and the time when, for example, they were able to move beyond the old city walls and set up the new city, right? Moses Montefiore, that area, or the Chovevei Tzion, those early lovers of Zion who came in the end of the 19th century. They would say this bracha on the new settlements outside of Jerusalem, right? So we're not even talking Zionists, we're talking pre-official Zionist movement. They began to say this blessing. Kach Mesubar Rabbi Shmuel Salant, Shebirach al Petach Tikva, he said it on Petach Tikva. Mordechai Gimpel Yafeh, Shebirach al Yehud, and the settlement of Yehud that was established. We begin to have that possibility of establishing Jewish homes in the land, even pre-state, as long as there's a certain sense of confidence that this is construction that's, I guess, to quote the auto industry, built to last. You then have him in another article write further that this is a way that we celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut. We celebrate the state of Israel in different levels. He quotes 4 levels. In the 3rd level, source 13, are people who take trips to visit the communities in Judea and Samaria to observe the continuation of the settling of the land and recite the blessing Matziv Gevul Almanah. Concerning a settlement that one visited previously, although 30 days have passed since one's last visit, the custom is not to recite another blessing. However, in the meantime, more houses were built in the community. Blessings should be recited. Right? He says this is something that tourists visiting these places have a reason to say the bracha. If you live in Israel, you go there, you don't have a reason to say the bracha, but new houses, a blessing should be recited. Right? Rabbi Malamed is seeing in the modern era a reason to say this bracha fully and absolutely. It applies, especially in Israel. But he's not looking at this as just a shul thing. He is looking at this as a building up the land of Israel blessing, and it's appropriate, has been appropriate for some 130 years since Petach Tikva was built, or even since they began to extend from outside the old city walls. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi, who was the chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, also addresses this. At the same time, he's not as confident about saying the blessing fully with God's name. Right? And he says, Kasher Zachinu, when source number 14, when we merited L'Shilton Yisrael Be'eretz Yisrael to have a Jewish government, we fulfill the conditions of saying this bracha. Just because we have enemies who do sometimes, and especially, we feel that today, are able to attack us, this is not a hindrance in saying the blessing. Because he says, unfortunately, our enemies will continue to attack us until Mashiach comes. But in the meantime, we live under a Jewish government in the land of Israel. That's a Yishuv Yehudi hu Batei Yisrael b'Yishuvam, and the Jewish settlement in the land is the houses of Israel as they are being rebuilt. That's what the bracha is for. We should say the bracha fully with God's name and mention God as King of the universe. I wrote this briefly in my book, Makor Chaim. I'm not able to see myself as being able to say that this is the law in a book that lots of people will read. He's reluctant to publicize this as the practical way to go and say this bracha with God's name. Because it's new. Back in the days of yore, they only said this bracha on synagogues. It's a very big halachic innovation. I don't want to take responsibility for this decision. It's not, it's not my place. I don't stand in that space of the Gedolim. So Rabbi Malamed is willing to go further and encourage the blessing to be recited. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi says you could, but he doesn't want to be the one to prescribe it or to encourage it, because he does see that this is very different generationally. If you compare what we saw in the Mishnah Berurah says that this, concludes this is not to be said with Shem Malchus. It becomes, even though the situation has changed, it's still something that Rabbi Chaim David Halevi is not willing to do. Just in an article online about seeing newly built Jewish settlements, other voices and other views, right? We see Rabbi Malamed who says, say the bracha fully. Rabbi Chaim David Halevi who says, you could say it, but he's not going to encourage it. Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, source number 15, would recite it whenever he visited a new yeshuv. And if he would be asked to speak at the inauguration ceremony, he would recite it in the middle of his speech on behalf of the audience. He was so convinced of the open hand of Hashem restoring Eretz Yisrael to its former glory that he exclaimed that sometimes concern for bracha levatala comes from a lack of emunah. And he felt those who wouldn't say this bracha just showed lack of faith in God. In his wake, Rabbi Lezer Malamed penned a chapter, that's what we saw, detailing when one may recite the bracha. The regular rules of Birkot Hariya apply as long as one hasn't seen the location in 30 days. He may recite the bracha, which makes it irrelevant to local residents and more appropriate for tourists or visitors. He recommends failing the reverse view and reciting it inside a synagogue, right? Because then you cover more opinions. One who recites it at home also has what to rely upon. Among contemporary Talmidei Chachamim, Rav Hershel Schachter recited the bracha when visiting Yeshivat Elon Moreh, as per Rav Levanon's instruction. There's a video of Rav Schachter saying the bracha with Rav Levanon at that yeshiva, saying the bracha fully with Hashem's name. Rav Lezer Malamed, Rav Dov Lior, Rav Chaim Drukman have done so on similar occasions. And so I guess it's not surprising that the Hesder Yeshiva student encouraged that the bracha be recited of Matziv Gvul Almana, in addition to setting up the mezuzah, as certainly putting up a mezuzah on a dwelling in Israel has significance to do so immediately, as well as acknowledging the restoration of a Jewish home in the land of Israel. So it's just from within the headlines and within the videos of what's taking place, a halachic discussion of mezuzahs and a halachic discussion of what it means to rebuild in the land of Israel.